So before I get started here, for our friends and community joining us digitally online, if you are on the CEHV, the Congregation Emmanuel email list, the source sheet was sent out there. If you're not, I'm going to slowly talk about how you can find the source sheet online, which your first step is to open up another window or tab and go to sepharia.org. That's SEFARIA.org. In the top right corner of Sepharia, once you're there, you should see a search bar. And if you search my name, Rabbi Bryan, B-R-Y-A-N, man, M-A-N-N, you should be able to click on my name, and then you'll see on that page, once you've clicked on my name, Rabbi Bryan Man, a source sheet that says, "Let us make humanity." And that will get you to the same source sheet that we have in the room. And a lot of my teaching today is going to be interactive. So if you are joining us digitally, if you are in the room with someone else, that might be helpful. Or you might get in touch with a friend on the phone or by text or social media. Be like, hey, want to learn with me really quick? Cool. Moving from logistics to learning. And we're going to move into learning with a practice that I learned from my main learning community since rabbinical school, Sfara, a traditionally radical yeshiva, a queer normative yeshiva, which is that prior to doing any sort of Torah study at Sfara, we dedicate our learning. Dedications could be to someone in need of healing. It could be in honor of someone's memory. It could be for some sort of part of the world that you're thinking about. It could be in honor of someone who would be delighted that you're here on a Shabbat doing some Torah learning. It could be in honor of someone who is utterly shocked, but who you still respect, that you would be here on a Saturday at Shabbat doing some Torah learning. My dedication today is going to be in honor of the memory of Reb Arthur Waskow, who passed away on Monday and whose funeral was on Wednesday, a giant in the Jewish world, especially advocating for environmental justice and other justice issues in the Jewish world. Are there 2 to 3 folks who want to offer dedications? Pull it.
Two dedications to the memory of Holly Miller, Marty Miller's daughter, whose her site this Shabbat.
I'll dedicate to my father, Yitzhak and Alexander Visible.
I dedicate to the realization with hope and prayer to the Middle East peace.
We lift up these dedications shared out louder in our hearts, once again reciting the prayer for Torah study that we recited earlier. Gotta be aware of where my arms are. That we recited earlier in our Torah service. If you need the words, they're on page 206. If you just want to respond amen, that's okay too. If you just want to be in this moment because prayer is not your thing, that's also fine. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu ruach haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, ruler of time and space, who invites us into sacredness with your mitzvot, inviting us to soak or get busy with or immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Those are all different translations I've learned from my teachers at Sfara. Let's jump into it. I'm going back a week. I'm going back into our creation story. So sorry for those who wanted to get some Noah learning. We're jumping a little bit backwards. And we're going to be learning one of my favorite Midrashim, one of my favorite, what some folks call rabbinic fan fiction on the Torah. Stories that come to fill in some gaps or some questions or some wonderings that aren't answered in the Torah. Every Midrash starts with a question. Is someone willing to read out the words from the Torah that this Midrash is coming to answer some questions about. The first source, Genesis 1, 26 to 27. Just 2 verses in English. Palu, go for it.
You want me to read 26 and 27?
Yeah, both of them, please.
And God said, let us make humankind in our image, after our likeness. They shall rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the cattle, the whole earth, and all the creeping things that creep on earth. And God created humankind in the divine image, creating it in the image of God, creating them male and female.
What are your questions? Or what do you notice? What's interesting about these verses? What's confusing about these verses? What are you wondering about as you read these 2 lines from Torah? Yeah.
That God expects us to be above all other life in the world.
Yeah. That we are, in this moment, told that we are, that we are rulers, right, over the fish, the sea, what have you, right? The other verses about creation call us caretakers, but in this case, we're rulers. Could be uncomfortable for some folks. What else? What are your questions? What are your wonderings? What do you find interesting?
I noticed that it's saying, make humankind in our image, after our likeness. And it's not saying my, it's using like a plural. And just reminding us that the source, to me it's saying, reminding me that the source is so many things and so many beings in so many ways.
Well, yeah, the plurality, right? Theoretically, this is the divine talking, and yet we have, let us make humanity in our image, in our likeness.
In response to that, immediately it's Elohim, which is plural.
Yes, in the Hebrew, Elohim is plural, so we do have a plural name for the divine.
But that's not what I was going to say. It also gives us the responsibility to, it's a responsibility to be, all right, how am I going to say this? Give us the responsibility over the rest of the world. Not only to rule over it, but to be responsible for everything else. Well, that's not here either.
Right.
In this particular verse, I'm sorry.
No worries. You're right that it's not here, but it is elsewhere in Torah. So you're not wrong that we have that injunction or that responsibility or that what have you. I'm going to move us ahead a little bit. As Rabbi Jack has said in this room many times and in that room many times, the rabbis will find meaning in every single letter, every single dot, every single everything in the Hebrew language. And what the rabbis are confused about is the Hebrew phrase na'aseh adam. And this is picking up on Alex's note that elsewhere there's plural, that there's this our language, but na'aseh is let us make, right? And there are 3 options for how to translate this. It could be a command. It could be, let us make humanity, right? It could be a question. Should we make humanity? Is that a good idea? Or it could be just a regular statement in the second person for some reason. Like just, yeah, let's make humanity. Let's just do that. And so the rabbis in this midrash are coming to both answer those 2 questions. Is this a question, a statement, or a commandment? And who's the we? Who is God talking to in this moment? That's going to be answered by our midrash. And I want to move us forward, Dave. Or is it yeah, go for it.
God is talking to the angels.
Yeah, that's exactly where we're going to go in our midrash. So let's go into the text, because before we drosh on the text, I want to see what's in the text. I appreciate it, though. You are right on, because that's exactly where we're going. So moving into Bereshit Rabbah, Genesis Rabbah, the Rabbahs are kind of our first, it's a collection of Midrashim, of rabbinic stories, on the text organized by Parsha. So you're starting the very first rabbinic stories that you're going to get when you open up Bereshit Rabbah is rabbinic stories about Bereshit bara Elohim, in the beginning the divine created. So this Bereshit Rabbah is coming in on that phrase Na'aseh Adam. You have the Hebrew on the first page, the English on the second. Does someone want to jump in with this first paragraph of this midrash? Please.
It's the whole thing, right?
Yep, just that first paragraph though.
Rabbi Simon said, when the Holy One, blessed be the source, came to create Adam, the first human, the ministering angels divided into various factions and various groups. Some of them were saying, don't create. And some of them were saying, create. That is what is written. Kindness and truth met. Righteousness and peace touched. Kindness said, create as he performs acts of kindness. Truth said, don't create, as the entirety of him is lies. Righteousness said, create, as he performs acts of righteousness. Peace said, don't create, as the entirety of him is discord.
Awesome. I want to give the Hebrew names of these angels because that might also help elevate some thinking in the room. So where it says that kindness said create, kindness is chesed. Where it says truth said don't create, truth is emet. Where it says that righteousness said create, righteousness is tzedek. And where it says peace said create, peace, or where peace said don't create, peace is shalom. So chesed says create because he, the first human or humanity, will perform acts of kindness. Emet or truth says don't create because the entirety of him or the entirety of humanity is lies. Tzedek, justiceness or righteousness, says create because he, this first human or all of humanity, will perform acts of righteousness. And shalom, peace or wholeness, says don't create because the entirety of him, either this first human or all of humanity, is full of discord. Who do you agree with? Who's in whose camp? Let's argue it out here and now. Who's on team chesed? Who wants to argue based off what we've seen in the world, our own personal lives, our own history, things in this community? Who wants to argue the chesed argument?
The question is ludicrous because we're here.
We'll get there. Don't worry, we'll get there. We will get there. We are here. But I want us to lean into these angels' arguments right now. I want us to be in this midrash. Who wants to argue the chesed argument that humanity performs acts of kindness based off a personal story, based off what you've seen in the world, based off other things going on? I saw Palu and then I saw Vicky. Palu, are you retracting your hand up?
I'm not picking
Okay.
a side, but I just feel like, and maybe this isn't true, but it seems to me like Hesed and Tzedek are often paired together. I feel like there's a pairing here. Yeah, that's just a comment.
Yeah, and I'll come back to that if I forget. Vicky.
Yeah, well, I'm going with chesed because it's not saying that all of that humankind is all kind. So that leaves room for there to be some badness there. The other one saying,
Well, hold on, because you're chesed right now. So you have to make you're not saying that oh yeah, there are some humans. You're saying no, humanity performs acts of kindness.
That's right.
So give me an example of how and when you've seen humanity be kind, or humanity, or even just one human performing an act of kindness.
okay, like people giving food to the hungry.
Great. Awesome. Who wants to take on Emmet's argument? Humanity is full of lies, or all of humanity are liars. What evidence do we have in the world today?
Politicians.
Politicians. Alex said it. Palu. I saw your hand go up again also.
Well, I wasn't going to like a particular group of people, but that it feels like there's a blanket of confusion over the world and people not knowing what to believe or what's correct or, yeah.
Right? How many times have we heard the phrase fake news in our world today? And how many times have we had to figure out whether or not something we're seeing on social media or something that was emailed to us or something that someone is telling us is based in truth, or if it was a made-up story or hyperbole, or they just read the headline but not the full story, right? And now are interpreting and translating based off a headline, right? Who wants to take the tzedek argument, the righteousness or justice argument, that humanity will perform acts of righteousness?
Well,
Please.
you're getting into the Sefirot, okay? Because one actually balances out the other. You know, you could have chesed and gevura.
Right.
Too much kindness is not going to work, and too much judgment is not going to work. But when you combine them both together, they work.
Right.
As a matter of fact, you have to have both.
Great. Yes.
Almost like
Right, bringing in the Kabbalistic idea for those that don't know, that we have these qualities that the divine also has, but every human has. And some of us might more naturally align toward one side of a quality or another, but that our kind of goal, both for ourselves and for the world, is to have the right balance of these qualities. Appreciate it. Thank you, Dave. But is there anyone willing to give an example of an act of righteousness, an act of justice, an act of tzedek? We are pessimists in this room.
Very pessimistic.
Right?
I feel like tzedek can be a tricky concept to grasp.
Cool. Yeah, so tzedek, right, there's different ways to think about. I appreciate that this text leaned more into the righteous versus the justice, right? But, like, you know, tzedakah, charity, comes from the same root as tzedek, right? So if it's hard to grasp kind of like righteousness, like Vicky kind of already gave an example with chesed of people giving food to others, is its own act also of tzedakah, of charity, and could be seen as an act of righteousness, right?
Maybe volunteering in your community,
Volunteering in your community.
like here.
Nice. Awesome. And finally, probably way too easy, but the shalom argument. Don't create, because humanity is full of discord, or is full of war, or full of quarrel. Do we need to even explain that out in this moment? Does it feel so obvious, or?
God knew all those characteristics, and I think it's in the Midrash. He says, "You're right," but he took the truth, threw it to the ground.
Do you want to take us into the next?
Do
Do you want to take us into the next paragraph?
I don't know where we are.
So right under the questions to consider, the italicized part, where that next paragraph, what did the Holy One, blessed be He, that's exactly the part that you're referring to in this midrash.
What page?
So we're on still under Bereshit Rabbah 8:5, and then on that page,
You're on the right page, James. You got it. Second page.
yep,
What?
You're right there.
This is it?
yep,
The second paragraph. Second
This one.
full paragraph.
yep.
What did the Holy One, blessed be He, blessed be the One, do? The divine took truth and cast it to the earth. There you go. That is what is written. You cast truth earthward. The ministering angel said before the Holy One, blessed be the source, master of the universe. Why are you demeaning your very seal? Let truth ascend from the earth. That is what is written. Truth will spring from the earth.
Right? The angels are deadlocked. We have these, and right, let's not forget the very beginning of this midrash, that these weren't just these four. These four represent different, either some people say committees, some people say debate squads, some people say, right, like they are representing factions, right? And so we have these 4 factions, and the divine has to figure out how to answer the question, or how to break the deadlock. So what does the divine do? Let's just let's just make sure we're all kind of clear on what happens here. What does the divine do to break the deadlock? Yep, takes the angel of truth, maybe even truth's entire faction, but at least what's in the story itself is just the angel of truth, casts truth out of heaven.
Cast truth what?
Casts truth out of heaven down to the ground.
He cast truth to the
I
ground.
get it.
Yeah.
I get it. I just don't understand it. Does it mean that God is sending truth to the world? That the world should absorb and be truthful? Or is God just throwing it away? Like taking it out of the goodness of heaven and throwing it down to earth?
Palu, is this a response to Vicky?
Yeah.
Great.
I feel like Judaism sort of values peace very, very highly above a lot of other things. And it it's like Darkei Shalom, like ways of peace. And there's this famous story between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai about being at a wedding, and you're supposed to compliment the bride. It's this time of joy, and the question comes up: what do you say to a bride if she's actually really ugly? Do you still compliment her? Do you still say? And there's an argument between Hillel and Shammai about, Shammai says you can't lie, you can't desecrate truth and spirit of God and things like that, so you have to tell the bride that she's ugly. And Hillel says you're going to disrupt peace, the peace of the marriage between a husband and a wife. If you do that, you have to just go the way of peace and give her compliments and whatever. And the halacha always decides with Hillel, but that's just the story that I always remember. That's there's all these instances that come up between this tension between truth and peace, and peace tends to win out where we want to keep our relationships functional and yeah.
Cool. So Palu's partially giving a response to one of the underlying questions here, which is why truth, right? As Dave already pointed out, God's clearly biased. We're here. God clearly wants humanity to be created, right? So what God needs to do in this moment is to get one of the people, one of the factions, one of the parties saying don't create out of heaven so that God has the majority of the angels, which means our options are God either has to get truth out of heaven or get peace out of heaven, because those are the two advocating don't create, right? And Palu is bringing up that in other places in Jewish text and tradition, we see this tension between truth and peace. And often, when we look at those texts as a whole, peace more often wins out than truth. Why else? Why else might God have made the choice to cast truth out as opposed to peace out?
Well, I see it that he didn't cast truth out, but merged it with truth on earth. And because even in the last part of this commentary, truth will spring from the earth, from Psalms. In other words, there's one truth between heaven and earth.
Right.
It's not it's not an either or. It's a combined. And about that wedding, the example of the wedding, if you could see it through the groom's eyes, you could see the beauty in the very ugly bride. There must be something there.
Right.
Not-
Right. Like the.
Not if it's a bedecked, it's the first time he saw her. Whoa.
So let's stay in this story for now. Right. The easy answer, the easy answer for why truth is because we have a text that says so. Right. This last line from Psalms, truth will spring up from the earth, which implies that truth at some point got to earth. So how did that happen? Well, clearly this story, right? Because Midrash often, even though it's joshing on one particular verse to start, will pull in other sources to prove its point, right? And so too with all of these factions. Why these particular angels or these particular factions? Because we have a verse that says, Chesed and Emet met, Tzedek and Shalom touched, right? So that's how we get these particular angels and this particular story, is because we have texts. Now, almost anyone, no matter how early you are in your Jewish learning, you likely know the vastness of the Jewish library, likely know that there's a ton of Jewish texts, and likely know, well, yeah, but there's probably a verse somewhere else that could make the opposite point, right? So it's not the most satisfying answer to say, well, it's because we have a line that we can drash on that gives us this rationale, but that's an answer to the question of why truth in particular. But I'd love to kind of get deeper, right? What's this overall message? What's happening here that truth in particular is the one that's cast? Vicky and then Dave.
All right, so when it's cast down to earth, it means that the people can catch it in a way and can make it rise in their lives. So it's not that God is withholding truth, but is almost gifting it. That's what I wanted to clarify. 'Cause
Yeah.
I wasn't okay, good.
Yeah, that's one interpretive tradition. It's in line also with the Lurianic Kabbalah story that when the divine contracted the divine self to create this world, because if divinity is infinite, you need to make space to create other things, that a bunch of vessels with divine sparks shattered, and it's one of our jobs to lift up those divine sparks. A lot of commentators and interpreters link that story to this story, that similarly it's our job to bring truth back up. There's another line of commentary that links Emet truth with Torah, and this being kind of a drash on Torah being on earth, and it being on our job to uncover Torah and bring Torah out. But Dave, you also had a hand.
You see, the thing about truth is always the truth. You can't diminish it. Some people say, well, it's the truth as I see it, or there are alternate truth. There's only one truth. And that's the truth God gave us. It's we the people who diminish it by our bad thinking, so to speak. The truth will always be the truth. You can't take it away from it.
Right. And the link that I see to that in this text also is if you flip on the next page. Nope, sorry, where is it? Yeah, the next page, sorry. So Jastrow is a dictionary of Rabbinic Hebrew, and this is the Jastrow entry on this phrase of truth being God's seal, or as Jastrow says, ruler of court ceremonies. But there's some question marks that we see, both in Jastrow's translation of this weird word, which in the Hebrew is, sorry, give me one sec. Al-tichsiyah. So this Hebrew word al-tichsiyah, which in our translation was translated as your seal. Why have you demeaned your seal, right? Some other translators of this word would say ruler of court ceremonies. I have asked many teachers, many scholars about this word. This word only comes up twice, and it is this same story. This Rabbi Simon story is told elsewhere in Midrash, and this is the only time in rabbinic literature that we find this weird word for truth. So there's a little bit confusion of like what it means and why, but what we do know is the angels think truth had some special designation in the heavenly court. What exactly that was, we don't know. But this moment of God casting truth out of the ground in our story is met with the angels saying, Holy One, blessed be the source, master of the universe. Why are you demeaning your very seal? Maybe with a little bit of like, if God's going to do that to truth, is God going to do that to us?
That brings me to what I was thinking was that truth can kind of set the stage for all the other angels. That to have kindness, to have peace, to have righteousness, that first we must establish truth. And we kind of talked about
Nice. I want to go back to something that Vicky started to say when she was making her Hesed argument, which is something that that it took me probably actually my third read of this text to fully read in the Hebrew. The don't create camp, both Emet and Shalom, who are saying don't create, are making a kula claim. And a kula claim is when you're saying the entirety of this thing is this, or there's only one meaning of this, and this is its meaning. That's what a kula claim is. And so Emet's argument is all of humanity, or the entirety of a human, is lies, right? And Shalom is saying all of humanity, or the entirety of a human, is quarrel or discord. It doesn't quite go as far as to say war, but like some people read that in. Whereas the create camp, Tzedek and, teaching off memory is harder than teaching off sheet. Yeah, thank you. Chesed and Tzedek are making action claims. Create humanity or create a human, because that human is going to do something. They're going to do acts of kindness. They're going to do acts of justice, right? So they're not hanging on their hat on all of humanity is going to be this thing. They're hanging their hat on humans are going to do something meaningful in this world. Regardless of anything else that they do, enough of them are going to do something meaningful. The other two texts in this source sheet are just the proof texts, the texts from Psalms and Daniel that this Midrash references. The end of the Bereshit Rabbah story is basically a retelling of this same story, but instead of ending with a violent act of God casting an angel out of heaven, basically all of the angels are having their argument. God goes off somewhere, turns back around to the angels and says, "Why are you arguing? I already created humanity.
You already went.
I already created humanity." If we want to read the very last line, starting with, so it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up while the ministering angels. Does someone want to read from there? Let's read this last bit and then I'll get to you, Dave. Is someone willing to read? Is everyone seeing where we are? It's like the last full sentence starts while the ministering angels. It's like
While the ministering angels were busy deliberating with one another and engaging with one another, the Holy One, blessed be the one, created him. The divine said to them, "Why are you deliberating? Humanity has been created."
Indeed. This is deliberating. I prefer the term arguing or debating, but yeah. Basically, what are you all yelling about? I already created humanity.
The bottom of
Sorry,
the
y'all.
second page.
It's done. I did it.
The bottom of the second page.
It goes to a point. See, a righteous person might do a kindness or think it's a kindness, and it may not be in the eyes of other people. See, there's a whole other thing to think about.
Right. I mean, there are plenty of times in my life, I'm certain, where I thought I was doing something really well-meaning or really kind or, saying what would be comforting to someone, and it was not what they needed in that moment. And we, either shortly thereafter or longly thereafter, we had to have a conversation about ooh, that was not great, right? So yeah, but that goes back to, right, these claims that the angels that are on Team Create aren't making a claim saying, you're always gonna do the right thing, right? They're saying humanity will do good. Not necessarily all of the time, not necessarily every single time they attempt to do good, but humanity will do good. So therefore create humanity, right?
But did God, while the angels are having like a Talmudic discussion about the details, was God just throwing down all of that? And I have, all 4 qualities, But I have a question if that's the truth. Why is it that people are all evil, basically? And then they also can find the truth. If they're all evil, they can't find the truth or have chesed. So I'm confused about God's decision to just create humanity. While the angels are arguing whether God should create them or not, they're saying that human beings are all evil, and God just threw that down. I'm so confused.
Have you ever been in maybe with your children or with your family or with some friends where you're trying to make a group decision, but you already know what you want to do, right? You already know what you want to do.
Okay.
And so you go to other people to say like, hey everyone, wouldn't it be a great idea if we did this thing? Don't we all really want to do it? Wouldn't that be awesome? And they might be like, not really. But you still decide like, nope, we're gonna do the thing because, I'm the one with authority here. Either I'm the parent or I'm the, whatever, the person in the room with the most experience or the person in a particular positionality that has decision-making power over others, right? Like, or even just with like friend groups, right? Like often in friend groups, usually there are somewhat more dominant voices and people that are more down to just like go along, right? And so that's kind of what's happening in this latter part of the story, right? All we know from our story in terms of who gets cast out of heaven is truth, right? That's all we know. And the first part of this story, that's where it ends, right? The angels are shocked. The angels are like, how dare you do this to your special angel God? And that's where that story ends. We never get any sort of claim that God brings truth back up to heaven, that anything like all we know is truth gets cast out and humanity is created, right? It's the second story that's told in a different rabbi's name, right? Our first story is Rabbi Simon. I have no idea where this beat or dripping or I'm just sitting here all right, yeah. Anyway.
Maybe the angels will
Right, exactly.
say something.
Right, so it's the second story so our first story is told in the name of Rabbi Simon, Simon Says, or Simon, but I enjoy the Simon Says of it all. And our second story is told in the names of just the rabbis, but then in the name of Hanina bar Edi and Pinchas and Hilkiah, in the name of Rabbi Simon. So they're all referencing this Rabbi Simon story. And maybe they see this as a tikkun, maybe they see this as a repair of a violent story. Maybe this is actually we know what our teacher said and we disagree and we think it's messed up, but we still love and respect our teacher. So we're gonna still tell his story, but with our own take on it, right? It's also an oral tradition. So it's possible that, however many generations have passed since this Rabbi Simon story, people just told it in different ways along the way. And this is right? We have 4 different rabbis' names here. That this rabbi said in the name of this rabbi, in the name of this rabbi, in the name of this rabbi, right? Something's gonna get lost.
Holy telephone.
Exactly, holy telephone, right? And so in that story, right, no one gets cast out of heaven. All of the angels are arguing. It's weird metaphorically to think of an infinite being going off into a corner, but that's often how I teach this, is that right, all the angels are arguing. God goes off into a corner, creates humans, turns back around. What are you all fighting about? Right? I don't know who has sat on committees or boards, but right, imagine the chair of that committee or board. Hey everyone, I want you all to discuss this thing. I have a question, or we have a problem, or we need to come to a resolution. You all talk about a thing. I'm gonna run to the bathroom. That person doesn't go to the bathroom. They get on the phone with some other decision maker about that decision. They make a plan, they make a decision, they make the determination. Everyone in the committee or in the boardroom or whoever is all still debating about what should happen. And now that person, right, that board chair, that board president, that board whoever, comes back in the room and is like, hey all, I called our donor, we're done, we're good, have a good day, meeting's over, resolved it, it's done, right? That's essentially what the second story is saying. Dave, and then Hazan Alex.
I analogize God's thinking to Aidan Stansel's remark. He says the worst thing about being a Jew is you have to associate with them.
I
You know, everybody says that, but you don't know the real meaning of it. The real meaning of it is, no matter how you dislike a Jew, he's still a Jew, and you have to associate with him. You can't leave them out of the loop, so to speak. And that's principally what God is saying. Yeah, they're going to be evil, they're going to do bad things, you know, but I still have to associate them. I still have to make them.
Right, or there's other ways of, right, we all have to learn in our relationships, right? It all takes us time, whether it's a friendship, a romantic partnership, even just a acquaintance who we see around. We all have to learn things about each other. We all have to be in a relationship with each other. And I remember, Vicky, you really kind of bemoaning 2 weeks ago here about why is God flooding all of the people? Why is God destroying the earth? And one interpretive tradition on that is that if you look at God from basically early creation, where the moment God gets upset, God basically rage quits and either floods the earth or destroys an entire town and city in terms of Sodom and Gomorrah, through the stories that we then get later in Exodus, Leviticus, Bamidbar, where God is angry with the people, and Moses is like, whoa, hold on, God. These are real life people you're dealing with. Let's calm down a little bit. Let's remember that we don't always have to be angry, right? Let's come up with maybe some other solutions that isn't murder and destruction and pain, right? And that there's an interpretive tradition that sees, for those of us that have deep relationship with the divine, it's weird to think of the divine as a character in a story. But there is an interpretive tradition that when you look at the character of God biblically, it's a learning and growth process for the character of God with God's creation, right? Because there weren't people until God created them, right? And so God had to figure out, okay, now I'm angry at you. What do? I'm going to hit you. No, that's not great, but that's sometimes our first instincts too, right? And we also have to calm ourselves down in those moments of cool, yes, I would love to punch the person I'm angry at right now. I'm not gonna, but, right? So the main thing that I really wanted to draw out from these stories is really that linchpin that I was talking about before. That when we think that the entirety of a person or the entirety of a people, right, or the entirety of humanity is all one thing, it's going to be so easy to dehumanize them. It's going to be so easy to say, that person is only this, I don't like that, and so I'm not going to associate with them. Or worse, I'm going to ensure they no longer exist, right? Whereas if our framing is, yeah, that person did something that I don't like, but that person also has shown up in these ways, or that person is also contributing to this community in many ways, or I see that person all of the time donating to something, right? The more and more that we see people for what they're doing in the world versus our interpretation of who they are, especially when it comes to a negative, the more open we may be to learning their stories, to associating with them, to being in relationship with them. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you so
you.
much, Rabbi Bryan.